Welcome to the Leo Zagami Show in this new edition, Illuminati News plus Illuminati Confessions, celebrating 20 years of Illuminati Confessions. We started in 2006, we are now in 2026, and all the things I've been talking about have come into fruition. So let's talk about what is also about to happen. However, today we are discussing Trump, who is about to arrive in Davos, and the Sabbatian Frankist origin of the Federal Reserve, because one of the initiatives of Trump in Davos is to announce also the new head of the Federal Reserve. In the coming hours or days, we will have the substitute for Powell, who is not very happy about the situation, about being investigated. This is what Powell has said. But first of all, I have to thank our sponsors. Christy! The sponsors. So who are the sponsors of today's show? It's trying to win you. Okay, in the meantime, let's see what Powell has.
Daniel Estes.
Okay, Daniel Estes. Then we have somebody else.
Well,
Margot Rosada Minta.
probably.
Okay. Let's see the statement by Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell in the meantime.
Good evening. On Friday, the Department of Justice served the Federal Reserve with grand jury subpoenas, threatening a criminal indictment related to my testimony before the Senate Banking Committee last June. That testimony concerned in part a multi-year project to renovate historic Federal Reserve office buildings. I have deep respect for the rule of law and for accountability in our democracy. No one, certainly not the chair of the Federal Reserve, is above the law. But this unprecedented action should be seen in the broader context of the administration's threats and ongoing pressure. This new threat is not about my testimony last June or about the renovation of the Federal Reserve buildings. It is not about Congress's oversight role. The Fed, through testimony and other public disclosures, made every effort to keep Congress informed about the renovation project.
So what is this Federal Reserve? Why does it exist, this central bank, which is not called a central bank? Let's go back into the history of this Federal Reserve. Born officially with this Federal Reserve Act that was passed just on the eve of Christmas 1913, and that meeting, that secretive meeting of supposed duck hunters in Jekyll Island in 1910. Now, here I have a video that was produced by the Atlanta Fed to celebrate 100 years of the Jekyll Island meeting. which was a pivotal moment in the history of mankind, believe it or not, guys, because the Federal Reserve has changed forever the way the economy was done here in the United States of America.
Meetings can have lasting meaning, and a meeting on Jekyll Island, Georgia 100 years ago this month was an important moment in the evolution of U.S. central banking.
Not only U.S. central banking, because we will discover that in reality, this whole initiative, which is said to be controlled by Congress, and it is a Federal Reserve, so, it seems like something public, something that belongs to the American people, is in reality a private enterprise by the usual families, those families very close to the Sabbatian mafia elite, actually part of it, especially in Europe, like the Warburg family, was directly involved in the Sabbatian Frankist controversy. So there is a lot we're going to be discussing today. Somebody has suggested in the chat I should be doing a show also during the week. Well, that would be lovely. But we need sponsors, guy, because I do my show 4 times a week for my Italian audience, only because we have a bunch of sponsors. If I don't have the sponsors, how can I carry on a show which takes time from my writing? Because let's not forget that Leo Zagami is a writer, and this book in particular is my present bestseller, The Rise and Fall of a Frankist Monster, exposing Jeffrey Epstein and the most powerful Jewish sect in the world, has a lot of the elements that went to create the Federal Reserve. So let's see this official presentation of this creature from Jekyll Island, as my old friend G. Edward Griffin called it in a bestseller that sold 1 million copies, a book of great interest on the Federal Reserve, which I highly recommend.
That meeting is also the reason for the gathering here today. An important outcome of the 1910 meeting was a proposal for an institution with multiple branches, which became in part the model for the decentralized structure of the Federal Reserve System. A series of financial panics, culminating in the Panic of 1907, prompted Congress to undertake a series of steps toward reforming the nation's monetary system to promote macroeconomic stabilization. Congress passed the Aldrich-Vreeland Act in 1908, establishing an 18-member National Monetary Commission chaired by Rhode Island Senator Nelson Aldrich. The commission was charged with finding a way to reform the nation's monetary system, but progress was slow, and by 1910, the commission could not agree on a plan.
Now, this gentleman, who was heading the Republican Party at the time, is one of the main protagonists of the history of the Federal Reserve. He's the guy who really puts it together, who puts together this meeting in this place in the middle of nowhere with a very exclusive club, a club that will take on board 6 participants who represented the elite of the banking system. Now, those people who met in this Jekyll Island will change forever the history of the United States of America. And we will be discussing today what this group of bankers, officials meeting under Aldrich's guidance did. Often is described as a group of 6, other times as 7 participants in total, sometimes others like Norton or Strong joining briefly, leading to various counts. But we can say that 7 attendees, including Aldrich, is a common number for the core group that shaped the plan. Now, Nelson W. Aldrich, remember this name, because he is also linked by family ties directly to the Rockefeller family. In fact, Nelson W. Aldrich will actually inspire the name of Nelson Rockefeller, another important key player of the New World Order we discussed in our previous episode.
Aldrich took matters into his own hands, meeting with a group of bankers on Jekyll to formulate a plan. The group included bankers Paul Warburg, Henry Davidson, and Frank Vanderlip. Also present were Aldrich's secretary, Arthur Shelton, and A. Piet Andrew, a Treasury official. Warburg's attendance was critical because of his knowledge of European banking practices.
Now, this is very important. Warburg, his presence was critical. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Paul Warburg, but also about the people who were not at the meeting, but were equally influential for this meeting, because we had J.P. Morgan, who was involved, for example, with the Jekyll Island in 1910, as he was a member, by the way, of the exclusive Jekyll Island Club, where these influential people met secretly in November of 1910 to draft the plan for the Federal Reserve System, though he wasn't one of the attendees. Then we had also J.D. Rockefeller. Now, J.D. Rockefeller wasn't one of the attendees of this secretive meeting that drafted the Federal Reserve Plan, but his associate and banking interest, Morgan, Kuhn, Loeb and Co., by the way, which is that bank which I also talked about in regards to the Rockefeller interest in Venezuela, but also is a bank connected who will merge after with Lehman Brothers. This is a very important element also in the history of Jeffrey Epstein, because it connects to Schiff. Schiff, yes, another important protagonist, Jacob Schiff. Now, based on the historical records of the secret Jekyll Island meeting in November 1910, Jacob Schiff was not among the group of men who were physically present at the Jekyll Island Club to draft the Federal Reserve Plan, but he is frequently identified as one of the key figures involved in the discussion or the surrounding circle of individuals that led to the secret Jekyll Island meeting in November 1910. Then we have also Max Warburg, the brother of Paul Warburg, who was not physically in Jekyll Island, but his brother was, and he is a prominent banker and advocate for central banking, and was one of the key attendees, Paul Warburg, of the secretive meeting. The Warburg family, a family of Sabbatian Frankists of great importance. Now, for those who have read this book, you can go and read about the involvement of Schiff with Leon Trotsky, another Sabbatian Frankist, for the financing of the Soviet Union, for the early financing of the revolution, of the Bolshevik Revolution. But we also have, this is very important because they are all interconnected, the very important link that the Warburg family had with the Sabbatian Frankists. Because for those who might not know it, this important family of bankers, of this wealthy Warburg family from Hamburg, Germany, was actually directly connected. The wife of Max Warburg was Charlotte Oppenheim. Now, the Oppenheim family, as I explained in my book on Jeffrey Epstein, was an important family involved with the Sabbatian Frankist heresy. And I want to demonstrate this very simply. Watch here. Max Warburg, here it says, Max Warburg was one of 7 children born to Moritz Warburg, the director of family's Hamburg Bank, and his wife, Charlotte Oppenheim of the Oppenheim family, another prominent German banking family. His siblings were art historian and cultural theorist Abraham A.C. Warburg, chief architect, and then the chief architect of the Federal Reserve Board, Paul Warburg. But let me show you the connection with the Sabbatian Frankists, which is not some kind of conspiracy theory. I based my research on facts, as you know, guys. So let's go to this important connection between the Warburg and the Sabbatian, an historical connection, because it's connected with the Oppenheim family. The Oppenheim, okay, so there was a controversy in the early days of the Sabbatian movement that then became the Sabbatian Frankist with the arrival of Jacob Frank. Jonathan Eberschutz, this rabbi, was a very important protagonist of a controversy, which you can go and check for yourself, the Sabbatian controversy here. Watch. And if you check out on the main advocates who defended basically, and here you have also all the connection with, because he was also linked to Franz Thomas Elder von Schoffel, who was Moses Dobruska, who founded a Masonic lodge called the Asiatic Brethren, one of 4 Illuminati lodges in Vienna. But the other important element is that one of the people who defended this rabbi who was accused of being a Sabbatian Frankist was Chief Rabbi David Oppenheim. David Oppenheim, and he was, see, the people of Prague held Auschwitz in high esteem, and he was considered second only to Chief Rabbi David Oppenheim, who then becomes, as you can read also in my book, the guy who defends them. So the Oppenheim family defended the Sabbatian Frankist Rabbi Eberschutz, and of course it was involved with also the spread of the most progressive rabbinical schools and so on. So here we have talking about direct connections that the very founders of the Federal Reserve and their families had with the Sabbatian Frankists.
Aldrich was well aware that his meeting with bankers outside of the commission proceedings would generate controversy, which is why the group met at the remote Jekyll Island location. What emerged from the Jekyll meeting was the so-called Aldrich Plan, presented to the National Monetary Commission as a legislative blueprint. It became a catalyst for debate about the role of the government and banking in the central bank's governance. Representing a departure from the centralized governments of European central banks, the plan proposed that a National Reserve Association would function as the U.S. Central Bank. The association would consist of a federation of 15 regional bank associations, each to be presided over by boards of directors elected by the local banks. Aldrich's proposed central bank would promote economic stability by providing for greater financial stability. Though the bill Aldrich put forward to the U.S. Senate in January 1912 was not acted on, many of the proposals that came out of the Jekyll meeting remained at the core of the subsequent steps in the creation of the Federal Reserve. After the election of Woodrow Wilson in 1912, Congressman Carter Glass of Virginia, who had led an investigation into the concentration of power on Wall Street, assumed leadership of monetary reform, along with Senator Robert L. Owen. The Glass-Owen bill kept the key macroeconomic stabilization mechanisms of the Aldrich Plan, but provided for 8 to 12 districts with a reserve bank in each district. The difference that stood out the most was the governance of the central bank. The debate about a U.S. central bank had been mired in counter-arguments about who would control the system, bankers or appointed government officials. One compromise to resolve this disagreement involved reserve bank governance. Of the 9-member Reserve Bank Board of Directors, only 3 could be bankers. The others were to be engaged in commerce, industry, or agriculture. Another was that the Federal Reserve Board in Washington, D.C. would be the oversight and coordinating agency. The reconciled bill was passed as the Federal Reserve Act and signed into law by President Wilson in 1913.
Now, they say that the one in DC was the one overseeing everything, but in reality, after it was more and more clear as time went on, and then we entered the Great Depression, that the one that took control of everything was the New York Federal Reserve, because it was a reflection of that banking system and, of course, of Wall Street.
The 12 reserve banks opened about a year later. At the time, the board was made up of 2 ex officio members, the Secretary of the Treasury and the Comptroller of the Currency, and 5 other members appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. This centenary conference will examine how well the Federal Reserve's historical performance has matched the vision of its conceptual founders, both at Jekyll and in Congress, and what the Fed's near 100-year track record offers for its role going forward.
Yay, wow, applause. But let's not forget that what happened was that before the Federal Reserve, the US banking system was a fragmented, crisis-prone landscape of state-chartered banks issuing their own notes. They lacked, of course, an authority for stability, and this led to frequent panics. So with the panic of 1907, and then we had also the 1893, we had some big problems for the banking system, and apparently JP Morgan was the one who saved the day after the 1907 panic. But in reality, the 1907 panic that officially was triggered by the San Francisco earthquake and everything that happened after the crisis and so on was engineered by both Morgan and Rockefeller. So this engineering the crisis in the end led to the creation of the Federal Reserve. But let's not forget that this whole history that we are analyzing today is really an attempt to regulate our lives and to manage our own money, creating this money initially following the gold standard, but then after 1971, with the Nixon shock and in abandoning the Bretton Woods system, the gold standard, we are basically creating money out of thin air. This is the reality, unfortunately, the sad reality of today's economy that keeps on getting worse and worse. So what is this truth behind Jekyll Island?
What this is about is the greatest ripoff in history, the very way money and debt are created and controlled. This affects everyone on the planet. It is the basic cause of all our economic problems today. Until we recognize this, in every nation, nothing any national government does will fix the problem, and all of us will see mounting debts and sinking standards of living. Our children will inherit this mess, and it will get worse every single year.
This is the first time, I think, in history where mothers are saying to themselves, ooh, what do my kids have to look forward to? Maybe they shouldn't have kids.
The truth is that depressions are not normal. They are contrived. The truth is that nations don't need a national debt. The truth is that governments generally aren't printing money wildly. Governments are borrowing money wildly.
Our money supply has to be borrowed into existence by the community of money users, that's us, from the commercial banks.
The bulk of money creation is made by banks.
The banks decide when and how much money they are going to produce, so to say. The money supply is out of control, out of any control.
When governments today, they borrow money from the banks, basically you are just enslaving the rest of the economy, the people.
You need to create the money for the good of the people. It has to be a common good.
The banks have usurped that prerogative of creating money.
The problem is that we've given the power to create money to the banking sector. And we've let them use that power more or less unrestrained.
The new money coming into the economy starts as debt created by the banks, and it's unsustainable.
The way the system is going now, that either wittingly or otherwise, it is going to destroy Western civilization as we have known it for the last century.
Interest on a loan is reaping where you do not sow.
It's legalized theft. Legalized theft is what we now have with this monetary system.
This is quite different from the past, when money was created by the government.
There is no reason for governments to run the debt. It's a game of power, really.
The normal American citizen is becoming poorer and poorer, and the world economy is collapsing.
The good news is we can fix this. It won't take a war or a revolution. It only takes a simple understanding of the problem and its simple solution. The truth is that anyone can understand what's going on. This is not rocket science. The truth is that those who are making money off this ripoff want to keep you confused. Confused about the basic facts of what your money is and who creates it.
Welcome to the Leo Zagami Show, Illuminati News, 20 years of Illuminati Confessions. The books that you should definitely read after today's show are my latest book, as well as Volume 7, because Volume 7 is a book from the Occult Roots of the Great Reset to the Populist Roots of the Great Reject, that will make you understand more about what is happening here with the arrival of Trump for the first time in person since 2020. He's arriving in Davos. Now, some people said he's confronting Powell. In reality, he's simply placing his own guy, because this is very important for everybody that is following me now. Remember what I'm about to tell you, and remember the people who have said these things. Now, this is a citation by Meyer Amschel Rothschild, the founder of the Rothschild banking dynasty. He said, quote, "Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws." In the 1970s, Henry Kissinger, another Sabbatian Frankist, said more or less the same thing. Who controls money controls the world. Now, Donald Trump is not taking over the cryptocurrency world in the sense of an hostile takeover, but his administration and his family are making out of the pro-crypto policies their business of the future. They are, of course, making the US a major global hub for digital assets, which are the monetary assets of the future. And that's why Trump wants to take over the Federal Reserve. Trump is somebody who has promised us a lot of things during his presidential bid. Unfortunately, he has not maintained his promises. But let's go deeper and deeper into this monstruosity, as my friend G. Edward Griffin called it. And this brief clip by him, I think, explains it better, because he says really, explains very clearly the hidden crime behind the Federal Reserve System in this small clip.
Well, it broke up, but I guess you were asking me, what is the creature from Jekyll Island? I decided that I would write this book, if I could, like a whodunit mysteries story, because when I got into the topic myself, I discovered that the creature from Jekyll Island, of course, we're talking about the Federal Reserve System, which was created on Jekyll Island, and that's the reason for the title, that it represents perhaps one of the greatest crimes in all history. It's been right under our noses all along, and I thought it should be written about and described as a crime. And so we had to talk about who did it, how they did it, how they covered it up, where they buried the body, and so forth. I'm being a little bit facetious, but that was sort of the twist that I had in mind. I wanted to make it a story rather than just a lot of details. So to answer your question, it's the story and the historical record of how the central bank, is what they call themselves nowadays around the world. Not a bank, by the way, but it's an institution. Actually, it's a cartel, surprisingly enough. Federal Reserve System is not a bank, even though it calls itself Federal Reserve Bank. And it's not a bank.
It's not a bank, it's a cartel. Trump wants to simply take over that cartel. That's it, guys. There's nothing, I mean, what has Trump done for your wallet today? We are in January 2026. He might talk about affordability finally in Davos, but it's already too late. So here we are digging deep into the secrets of Jekyll Island, and I want to send a shout out to our friend Jason Liosatos, who has guested me on his show recently, a great show.
On Tuesday evening of November 22, 1910, just 2 days before Thanksgiving Day, a cold drizzle covered New York City with a foggy blanket. The sounds of an occasional passenger scurrying to catch a late train echoed across the marble floors of the new Hoboken, New Jersey train station. No one noticed the shiny Pullman car parked on the last track. Unlike the beat-up coach cars that the average person was familiar with, this long black beauty glistened in perfection. Its polished brass nameplate simply read, Aldrich. The car belonged to Senator Nelson Aldrich, one of the most powerful men in the United States Senate. By 10 p.m., most New Yorkers were tucked into their beds, but one group was on the move to climb aboard the Aldrich car that night. All the participants had been instructed to arrive separately and in utmost secrecy. All were instructed to be sure that none of New York City's voracious press were following them. Who were these men and what was their secretive mission? They were some of the wealthiest men in America, but more importantly, each of them represented the world's richest banking families.
Yes, and like I said, those banking families happen to be of a Sabbatian Frankist nature. Now, the group of international bankers who drafted the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 acted with utmost secrecy. They even dressed up as they were going for some duck hunting. They were hunting ducks, so they dressed up in an appropriate way. They got a private carriage in this train to bring them all the way to this very private club. Now, recall that President Theodore Roosevelt had named Republican Senator Nelson Aldrich to head a National Monetary Commission at the time. In 1908, following Morgan's and Rockefeller's manipulated panic of 1907, something was developing. And in 1910, in November 1910, Aldrich traveled on that private carriage on this train with a group of nations leading finances in secret to this private resort owned by Morgan at Jekyll Island off the Georgia coast. So this is really the beginning of our story. This secret cabal of Wall Street duck hunters joined Aldrich, and they were. Now let's list them. We said that there was also some of them who were not present, who had influenced the meeting but had avoided to be present. So let me list the ones who were not present. First of all, J.P. Morgan was not present but was very influential, J.D. Rockefeller, Jacob Schiff, Max Warburg. And then you have the ones that were present, aside from Nelson W. Aldrich, who was, by the way, happened to become also directly related with the Rockefeller family, because his daughter Abigail married into the Rockefeller family. Now, aside from Aldrich, there will be Paul Warburg. There was Frank A. Vanderlip, who was also a very important figure. He was both a journalist and a banker, and he became Assistant Secretary of the Treasury from 1897 to 1901. Vanderlip is known for his role in the Federal Reserve System, but he also was the founder of the first Montessori school in the United States, connected to the Anthroposophical Society, as you know, the Montessori school. So there is also this interesting link. Vanderlip worked with the Jekyll Island Group to develop the Federal Reserve. This is the guy, one of the most influential people in the history of the United States, even if he's not much talk about these days. And then you had other important people. This secret cabal, like I said, of duck hunters included, aside from Vanderlip, president of Rockefeller's National City Bank of New York, Henry P. Davidson, senior partner of J.P. Morgan, Charles D. Norton, president of Morgan Control First National Bank, Benjamin Strong, vice president of Morgan Control Bankers Trust, Paul Warburg, of course, from the Warburg family, who was also senior partner of Kuhn, Loeb & Co. Kuhn, Loeb & Co. is very important in also the history of Jeffrey Epstein. So please get this book as soon as you can. Let's re-immerse ourselves, thanks to these clips, which I've been taking from a very interesting documentary from a few years back on the origins of the Federal Reserve.
They were so well known that their comings and goings were frequently monitored by the New York newspapers, led by Joseph Pulitzer's New York World. If news got out that the representatives of the money trust had assembled, questions would be asked, conclusions drawn.
Yes, because after the crisis of 1907, let's say that the banking system was not very popular amongst Americans. A lot of these banks had gone bankrupt, didn't pay their dividends to the people who had their money inside their bank. Basically, the people lost their money left, right, and center after the crisis of 1907. So people already hated banks so much that if they discovered that a group of powerful bankers and important politician of the time who was leading the leading party at the time, the Republicans, was there to discuss the future of the monetary system in the United States, it would have been a scandal unparalleled.
Conclusions that could spoil years of careful preparation. The papers knew that the money trust was behind the economic booms and busts that had ravaged America since the Civil War. The entire nation had been sent into an uproar with the latest one, the Great Bank Panic of 1907. The public was demanding a solution. Freedom-loving Americans were fighting back with the few effective tools they had. They were tired of a do-nothing Congress which could never seem to come up with effective legislation to protect the public interest, only the banking interests. So, their goal this night was to assemble in secret, to write legislation which would be introduced in Congress, supposedly to control them, the money trust, to fix the problems they had created. But a single whistleblower could lead to a disastrous outbreak of populism and a potential end to the most lucrative monopoly ever devised in human history: absolute control of the money supply of the fastest growing nation on earth. Their purpose was to maintain the fiction that America's banking panics were some sort of immutable cycle over which humans had no control. They called it the business cycle. Their solution, an omnipotent central bank, one which would pretend to operate in the public interest and under the public's control, but in reality would be a complete captive of the money trust.
So here we are, completely captive. Okay, so we had. Let's go back to the ones who were there representing the banking system. We had also Piat Andrew, Assistant Secretary of the Treasury of the United States. The powerful Rockefeller faction had two influential representatives at Jekyll Island at this meeting, because one was Paul Warburg of Kuhn Loeb and Co., which doesn't exist any longer because it merged with Lehman Brothers, and we know what happened with Lehman Brothers, but it was very influential for a very long time. And like I also wrote in my latest book, was involved in the early funding of the Soviet Union and had a long history with the Sabbatian Frankist. And then, John D. Rockefeller definitely had a key role in organizing this whole meeting for the creation of the Federal Reserve. Vanderlip described the secret meeting with the following words. Let me cite Vanderlip here. I was, quote, I was secretive indeed, as furtive as any conspirator. Discover we knew simply must not happen, or else all our time and effort will be wasted. So very scared of being discovered. They were very secretive. Vanderlip then says, if it were to be exposed, the meeting, that a particular group had got together and written a banking bill, that bill will have no chance whatsoever of passage by Congress. So there was no talk really about Jekyll Island, even after the Federal Reserve Act was passed in December 1913. We can say that talk about Jekyll Island instead started to surface with the Great Depression at the end of the 1920s, with the early 1930s, and all the events, of course, that are now known with the Great Depression. Because at that point, people said, what has created all this? Who is behind all this? So that is an important statement, as it is an important statement also something that Forbes, B.C. Forbes, the founder of the financial magazines that we all know, he wrote this in 1916 regarding the Federal Reserve and how it became a reality. I'm going to quote now Forbes from 1916. I am giving to the world for the first time the real story of how the famous Aldrich currency report, the foundation of a new currency system, was written. The utmost secrecy was enjoined upon all. The public must not glean a hint of what was to be done. So this is, always in the realm of secrecy they were operating. And then he says, Forbes, Nelson Aldrich had confided to Henry, Frank, Paul, and Piet that he was to keep them locked up at Jekyll Island out of the rest of the world until he had evolved and compiled a scientific currency system for the United States, the real birth of the present Federal Reserve System, the plan done on Jekyll Island. Warburg is the link that brings the Aldrich system and the present Federal Reserve System together. So he is the link between the Sabbatian Frankists, of course, who were prominent in Europe, the Rothschild. Then we had in America the Schiff. We had, of course, the Rockefeller, who were connected to the Sabbatian Frankist of the Kuhn Loeb, and so Warburg was present, prominent Sabbatian Frankist. So this is what had happened at the time, and was important to never call this a central bank. In fact, in its January 11, 1911 issue, The Nation magazine noted of the Aldrich-Warburg Central Bank plan developed at Jekyll Island the following, and I'm quoting The Nation magazine. The name of central bank is carefully avoided, but the Federal Reserve Association, the name given to the proposed central organization, is endowed with the usual powers and responsibility of a European central bank. So the history of the European Central Bank goes back to the first central bank, the Bank of England. The Bank of England, still in existence today, is, of course, a very Masonic bank. In fact, we even have a Bank of England Lodge, that it's a regular lodge from the United Lodge of England, Bank of England Lodge number 263. It's an historic London Masonic lodge. It was established in 1788, almost 100 years after the Bank of England was founded in 1694. And the initial meetings were conducted at the Guildhall Coffee House, and then they are still a very influential lodge. By the way, involved with Dr. Robert Crucifix, who later founded the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite for England and Wales, even if it's called for England and Wales the Rose Croix chapter. And this lodge is very important for me because it was actually the lodge that sponsored the creation of Kirby Lodge 2818, which then in turn initiated me back in 2003 in regular Freemasonry. So I had the direct involvement, let's say, with this Bank of England lodge. Now, the influence, like I said, of the Federal Reserve of New York, the nation's largest banking, of course, New York is the nation's largest banking and money center, will be concealed, however, by creating these 12 independent regional banks in San Francisco, Kansas City, Minneapolis, Atlanta, Boston, etc. However, I repeat, the New York one was in reality the one that was pulling the strings. And Senator Aldrich admitted in a magazine article the following, and I'm quoting Aldrich here, quote, before passage of this act, the New York bankers, and he's talking about the Federal Reserve Act, could only dominate the reserves of New York. Now we are able to dominate bank reserves of the entire country.
It was an audacious plan. The bankers had not dared to reconstruct a privately owned central bank in America since 1832, when President Jackson had labeled them a den of vipers and destroyed their last one, the second bank of the United States. There were 6 participants in the Aldrich car headed for Jekyll Island. 5 of the 6 represented the 3 great banking families, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, and the Morgans. The Jekyll Island Club did not have a large year-round population. The majority of the members arrived after Christmas and stayed through March. In other words, between Thanksgiving and Christmas, the place would be nearly deserted, with only a minimal staff of caretakers.
So what happened was that this Jekyll Island group remained at the club for 9 days, working furiously to complete their task. Despite the common interests of those present, the work did not proceed without any friction, though. Senator Aldrich was always the dominating person in this situation. He was the director, the worship of master in Masonic terms. He considered himself the chosen leader of the group, and he couldn't really help ordering everybody around. He had a substantial banking interest, though. Throughout his career, he had been basically the owner of a bank stock. He hadn't been maybe the director of the owner of a bank like the others. So the one who brought the technical aspects was the Sabbatian Frankist Paul Warburg, who was the most experienced of the whole group. Let's say, Paul Warburg was the one who brought those European central bank elements that he had learned in Europe to America. Warburg was somebody who always lectured the people present, also, let's say, to impress them with his extent knowledge of banking. Then it was the diplomacy of Henry P. Davidson who really managed to be the catalyst and maintain the equilibrium between the participants. Because even if there wasn't many, and even if it was a very elite group of people, some elements, can maybe have problems with each other. And so they needed this diplomatic presence, let's say. Especially because you had this Warburg guy with this thick German accent, who was always there trying to remind everybody that he knew what a central bank was, a little bit like Klaus Schwab with Davos. And so that was the situation. Let's go back into the secrets of Jekyll Island. Welcome to the Leo Zagami Show, Illuminati Confessions, celebrating 20 years of Illuminati Confessions. And today I want to also remind everybody that we are about to encounter another Davos with Donald J. Trump as the main protagonist. We will be talking soon about it before the end of the show. But here, more news about the origins of the Federal Reserve.
It was the perfect place to meet in anonymity. The Aldrich Express pulled into the Brunswick, Georgia station at dinner time the next day, but a surprise awaited them. Reporters were waiting at the Brunswick, Georgia station. Mr. Davidson went out and talked to them. The reporters dispersed, and the secret of the strange journey was not divulged. Now let's take a look at these three great banking families to understand what they wanted. All three practiced extreme secrecy concerning their business activities. The Rothschilds are certainly the oldest of the big three banking families, and experts believe that they are the wealthiest. But estimates of the extent of their holdings are so shrouded in generations of secrecy that there are no reliable figures. We do know, however, that they have dominated European economics since the late 1700s. One of the greatest fortunes in history began in 1743 in Frankfurt, Germany, when a coin dealer named Amschel Bauer opened a counting house. He placed a sign over the door depicting a Roman eagle on a red shield.
Now, the link between the Rothschild, the Warburg, and the participant to the Federal Reserve might require a whole other show. However, due to the time at our disposal, we are trying to explain a little bit how things developed in a nutshell. Now, the concept of central banking, as well as the gold standard concept, which was created by Isaac Newton, were born in England. However, the other big thing that happened after the Federal Reserve was the ulterior development of another diablerie, let's say, that was created out of this meeting, the so-called fractional reserve banking. That is another diablerie that came out and that was first introduced at the Bank of Amsterdam in the middle of a very particular situation. Now, people might not know what fractional reserve banking is, but let me tell you, it's another fraud of sorts. So fractional reserve banking comes out, the origins of this fractional reserve banking come out of Amsterdam, which was a stronghold of the conversos and of some of the first Sabbatians. That is also a very important element that maybe we should eviscerate and analyze further on. The gold standard up until 1971 was a reality. So when it comes, the currency value was fixed to a specific quantity of gold. Then, at one point, President Nixon, after a secret meeting at the Bohemian Club here in Northern California, ended up the convertibility in 1971. And that was really the end of the Bretton Woods system that kind of put together the post World War II monetary order and was at the basis of the New World Order. So we had the Nixon shock, as it's called, this series of economic measures that included, it was his response. It was Nixon's response to an increasing inflation and threats of a security crisis. But in reality, it gave birth to this crucial moment, which then creates the possibility for fiat money, which is a government-issued currency, which a legal tender, which is not backed by gold or any precious metal or by any tangible asset or commodity. I repeat, is based on thin air. Is in fact the first attempt of fiat money was actually made by a gentleman who was also, there were two people who were protagonists of the banking system in the very early stage with the Bank of England. They were the ones who really had created this whole system. We can say that John Law and William Patterson are probably two people most of you have never heard of. But William Patterson was the founding member of the Bank of England, who is still regarded as one of the most eminent economists, but at the same time, he was one of the main proponents of the catastrophic Darien scheme. Another guy who was also very important at the same time. Both of these gentlemen, by the way, they were both influential Scottish financial thinkers, and Scotland had definitely a very important role in the early banking system, because let's remember that in Scotland you had the remains of the Knights Templars, and in fact even my family was involved in banking and in the foundation of banks in South America at one point. So this, like I said, this is a story that could bring us really talking for hours. However, we don't have that time, and so the other fraud, like we said, is the fractional reserve banking, which is the system of banking under which you take deposits from the public, keep only part of the deposit liabilities in liquid assets as a reserve, and typically lending the remainder to borrowers. In any case, the bank reserves are held as cash in the bank or as balances in the bank account at the central bank. And that is really something that is always a little bit awkward, to say the least. Let's not forget that when it comes down to the Knights Templars and the importance of Scotland, the Knights Templars were the ones who really invented the banking system and the system. The checks, you pay because nowadays you have a check that you might have signed and with the value. Well, that is a creation of the Knights Templars. So I think that today we have definitely analyzed a lot, but probably we will need more episodes to go into this subject. I mean, we know that, one might expect the CIA, the DIA, or some other super secret intelligence agency to keep, here in America, the secrecy with the Congress and to be unaccountable for things. No? But in reality, the biggest secrets that we have here in America are the ones that surround the Federal Reserve System. And that's why Donald J. Trump is going to Davos to search for more support, and of course also to announce his own choice for the Federal Reserve. So it's a very important moment for Davos this year.
It would be fair to say Davos 2026 is a Trump Davos. For the very first time, the US has a USA house. Right behind me is the church in Davos. This has in fact been home to our colleagues at CNBC for many, many years. It's now been taken up by the US, And as it says, it's celebrating 250 years of freedom and innovation.
A church in Davos. And look at the guys who have sponsored the initiative.
U.S. House is where U.S. officials are going to be homed for this week. This is, of course, being sponsored by U.S. companies, the likes of McKinsey, Microsoft, Qualcomm, Stars and Stripes, and many others. Now, why is this important? Because President Trump is coming to Davos in person this year, and he's bringing with him what is said to be the largest U.S. delegation to Davos ever. Senior Trump administration officials are expected to join President Trump here, the likes of Scott Bessent, Howard Lutnick, and many other officials, Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, are all expected to be here. This is going to be an interesting Davos because President Trump comes to Europe at a time when he's made no bones about the fact that he wants Greenland. He's not pulling back. In fact, if anything, he's doubling down on that ambition and his ambition to redraw the Western Hemisphere, so to speak. That's, of course, going to be one aspect of what gets discussed here in Davos. Let's see how European leaders react to that. So far, it's kind of been, yes, we support Greenland, we support Denmark. A little weak-kneed, if you ask me. Next up, Zelensky. He's going to be here as well. President Trump likely to meet with him. And of course, there's no breakthrough, no thaw there as far as the Russia-Ukraine peace talks or peace deals so far are concerned. Outside of that, as I was hearing a guest on Fox News say, President Trump comes to Davos, in her words, in his master of the universe mode, whatever that means. So what can
Master of the universe mode?
we expect by way of headlines as President Trump amplifies his American first agenda, his America first agenda? We will wait to see. Two important events that could perhaps coincide with President Trump's Davos appearance. One, Scott Bessent seemed to suggest that President Trump could announce the nominee for the Fed chief after...
Announce the nominee for the Fed chief. Guys, this is the important event that will take place in Davos, apparently.
Jerome Powell, either before or after Davos. So that's going to be an important one to watch out for. And next up, the U.S. Supreme Court. We've been waiting for that ruling on tariffs. It has said that there is an opinion that is expected on the 20th. Will it be about tariffs? We don't know. We cannot preempt.
Okay, so the United States has taken over a church in Davos. What is it? The Church of Satan? I don't know. I mean, guys, the situation is really out of order. So you might want to know more about the occult roots of Davos in Volume 7 of my Confessions, as well as knowing more about the rise and fall of a Sabbatian Frankist monster. That's, of course, Jeffrey Epstein, which includes the whole banking system, which is also present in Davos. Like I said, you know, the CIA and other intelligence operations are under control of Congress, but nothing is more secretive than the Federal Reserve System, which is accountable to no one. It has no budget, it is subject to no audit, and no congressional committee knows of or can truly supervise its operations. The Federal Reserve, virtually in total control of the nation's vital money system, is accountable to nobody. And this strange situation is basically what Trump wants to correct by taking the whole of the Federal Reserve over with his own nominee. However, things might not be as easy for Trump because Jerome Powell is somebody who has a lot of powerful friends. And there is also another thing that he's still going to be part of the board until 2028. So even if he doesn't maintain his position as chief of the Fed, he could still maintain the control of the board of the Fed, and that will be a problem for Trump. So it's definitely very interesting what is happening in Davos, and it's very interesting to see these links these links that are, of course, between Donald J. Trump, the Sabbatian Frankist, also through Jared Kushner, the links with attempting a complete takeover of the Federal Reserve, and what is Davos. Davos is a creation of a Sabbatian Frankist called Henry Kissinger, who was behind Klaus Schwab from the very birth of the World Economic Forum, as I explained in this book, together with Otto von Habsburg and the Jesuits and the Vatican II mafia. The Chabad-Lubavitch cult is only one of the expression of the Sabbatian Frankist within the Orthodox Judaism, because we know that Jacob Frank didn't only infiltrate the Catholic world, he also left over within the Ashkenazi world, in particular, his own representatives as fake Orthodox Jews, and the Chabad-Lubavitch organization is a demonstration of it. I hope you enjoyed this show today. Please share it on your social networks of choice. Please put like, and if you want more show, remember, more shows during the week, remember the sponsorship. I want to thank Daniel Estes today, Margot Rosada Minter, but guys, please sponsor the show so we can bring more and more of these shows to you every week. Thanks to Christy, who is there in the chat. I see her always checking out that you behave in the chat. And I repeat, I hope that you really enjoyed the show, because it was a very important show, understanding how they control every aspect of our life is essential. This year, there will be a lot of discussions regarding the AI. There will be also a very big Chinese delegation in Davos. We will be probably discussing more of what went on in Davos also next week. Take care, my friends. Remember, this is the Leo Zagami Show, and we are always present. Yes. And if you want to also eat some excellent food, get the Zagami Family Cookbook, Authentic Italian Cooking by Christy Zagami. Great recipes, great picks, especially great content to transform your home into a 5-star Italian restaurant.
Shop became known as the Red Sherman Rock.
Illuminati want my mind, soul, and my body. Secret society, trying to keep it on.